1. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Sista Docs Exhale. This is one of 6 episodes brought to you by these sisters here. Please introduce yourselves.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Lyrical Tay. My focus is faculty diversity and diversity within higher education.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Cupid, and my specialization is mentoring and sister circles for Black women in higher education.
And I am Tahira Madi, also known as Dr. 99, and my specialty is community psychology. We are members of a sister circle that was formed while we were getting our PhDs, and we went through a lot, as Black women often do, in their professional and educational journeys. So in these episodes, we'll talk about our experiences, we'll relate our research to everyday life, and we'll cover a range of topics, but we'll also exhale. For today's Exhale, we have brought in 2 guests to talk with us about friendships between Black women and Black men. Dr. Cupid, can you please introduce our guests?
Today, we have Dr. Sedrick Smith, who is a Baltimore City public school teacher and administrator from Baltimore, Maryland. We also have Tony Hynes, who is a Ph.D. student, author, and interracial adoption specialist.
Thank you. Thank you to Sister Scholars for having me, and I really appreciate this discussion. I think it's really important to talk about friendships in the Black community, but also how those friendships vary and change dependent upon gender as well sometimes. So definitely looking forward to the discussion, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you, ladies, for hosting this. Again, I agree with Brother Tony in that it's super important for us to have dialogue about the relationships between men and women in a platonic sense, the way that those relationships work to uplift Black people, especially in academic circles like most of us work in. So just appreciate the opportunity. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Awesome. So thank you again, Brother Scholars, for joining us today. So our first question is, we represent the millennial and zennial generations. Do you think there are generational differences between our friendships?
So I can answer that to start off. I feel, when I was thinking about this question, at first I thought to myself, well, yes, of course they vary, because there are going to be generational differences between any generation. Millennials, some of us grew up using, landline telephones. Some of us had cell phones by the time we were in middle school. Others of us were 18 when we had cell phones. Some of us were going into adolescence when 9/11 happened, and some of us were older or younger. And those experiences are all going to shape our existence within the world in a different way. However, as it relates to Black men and women, I feel as though there is not a significant difference between zennial and millennial relationships, because unfortunately we all go through this shared trauma together, and that has not changed enough for some of the things that are present within our friendships, and some of the things that are present in maintaining those friendships to be existent. We just saw yesterday, a few days ago rather, George Floyd was killed, and he was killed in really a senseless act of violence by police officers, and not only killed by one police officer, but also had more than one police officer on him. And then we also saw another police officer just standing by and watching. And so in decompressing what we're seeing and seeing another Black man's body, another Black body dead in the streets, and seeing it reshared and reposted and think pieced to death in some ways, we as both millennials and zennials who happen to be Black are coming to a place where our friendship provides that needed support in the aftermath of an incident like that. And not only with things like that, but in the aftermath of other racialized instances in our own lives, whether they be big or large, whether they be within academia or outside of academia as well. And so as it relates to just providing that support system, someone that you can look to, as your brother or sister in arms in this way. And I think that in that particular fashion, that's why I don't see a significant difference despite the other minute differences between the generations.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, Brother Tony. um, when I first saw this question, well, let me start by saying it's hard for me to speak on Gen Z, right? Because I'm not Gen Z. Like I don't. That's not my experience. That's not, I'm 35, 36. How old am I? I'm 36 years old. And so I am smack dab in the middle, I guess, towards the older end of millennial. And I think I've had lots of interactions with Gen Z as a father of a Gen Zer, as a teacher of Gen Zers, right? I am witness to many of those relationships and what they look like. And they do feel different than my own friendships have felt. But I'm cautious about calling them different because I think for me, the difference that I see is often one that's aligned to age, right? And the fact that, my friendships in my mid 30s are different than my friendships were when I was 16, and I don't know that, that, that what Gen Zers are going through in terms of their relationships are different because they happen to have been born in the 2000s, or just the fact that they are younger, and that at that stage of their lives, they haven't necessarily developed the same types of friendships that I'm experiencing right now. George Floyd has obviously been in the news and on the psyche of Black America in the past few days. And I know that I'm Facebook friends with Tony and you as well, Dr. Cupid. And so I posted something to my story yesterday, which was basically like, if you see me being, killed by the cops, don't record it, help me. And, I got a lot of messages in response to that post yesterday. And in many ways, that for me, represents the difference that I see between where I am now in my friendships and where, younger people are in terms of their friendships. As I get older, what I look for more in a friendship is action, is someone who is there in time of crisis, is someone who is reliable and dependable, and who is willing to stand with me and lock arms and fight with me, right? And that's not necessarily the same thing that we look for in a friendship when we're younger, right? And so, this idea that we live in this age where social media sort of has taken hold and sort of shapes lots of our relationships. And I think that's probably more true for Gen Z than it is for the millennial, just because the millennial is a bit of a blend of pre-social media and in the midst of social media, right? And so, for the Gen Zer, there is no world without posting something or videoing something. And that can be traumatic, right? I mean, we see it in the recording of the deaths of Black bodies, right? And we see it in the posting of videos that work to tear down friendships, right? There's sort of this loss of privacy, this loss of intimacy that exists much more so than it did when I was a teenager. And so I don't know that that is specifically because they are Gen Zers and I am millennial. But I think, again, to me, it sort of gets back to, as we grow in different stages of our lives, we need different things from friendships. And so generational divides sort of reflect that, but I don't know that it's because of the generational differences that we have.
So Dr. Lyrical Tay and I are both Gen X. I don't know if it's appropriate for us to answer. I know your question was about millennials and zennials. But just hearing it's interesting that they both talked about in the context of all of the Black death and the lynchings that we have to witness day after day, week after week, year after year at this point. But I do think we do have to look at it in terms of what age we are. So I feel like I've always had male friends, but then I wasn't necessarily allowed with society or with however they viewed male-female relationships. It was such a thing as, oh, there's no way a man and a woman can be friends. Even though I knew I had those friendships, being told by other people, men, boys just want to get in your pants, so they can't really be your friend. Or if it's somebody you feel like is a friend, you had to call them, that's my play brother, that's my play sister, that's my play cousin, that's my god brother, in order for people to just leave you alone and let you have a friendship with a man, as far as I was concerned. Wondering how Lyrical Tay experiences that as a Gen Xer.
I've had male friends growing up, and as we've gotten older, the friendship have changed, and especially friendships that start out, platonic and stay that way. So I've definitely experienced that, but likewise, sometimes in going after a friend for strictly a sounding board, or not having brothers personally, but I have a lot of male cousins, but always looking for like the male voice, the male perspective. So that it has been important to hear, especially as a woman growing up without a father pretty much for like half of my life, like looking for the male voice, wanting to hear the male voice, the male opinion. So that has been important in terms of male friendships.
I didn't answer the question in terms of gender, but I think it's a really interesting point that you both posit, in that, I definitely had female friends, girls, women as friends growing up. But again, I think it's interesting. I think that I thought of myself as being in the minority in when I was a teenager, sort of, and in my young adulthood, sort of developing those relationships, because I think my experience was that most of the male-female relationships that I saw that ended in friendships were because women set clear boundaries for the men, right? And that the men, had they had their opportunity, might have wanted to develop something that was more than just a friendship. But the women were pretty clear that, this is meant to be a friendship, and that was fine. But I don't know many, at least in my teenage and early adult years, I didn't know many guys, many men, young men who purposefully sought out, girls to be their friends. As I've gotten older, I've definitely seen much more of that. And I think that, again, just comes with maturity and age and understanding what sort of things you value in a person, regardless of gender or sexual identity. But I think, maybe for younger people, and dealing with the burgeoning of adulthood and hormones and all of those sorts of things, it seemed a little bit more difficult to have genuine male-female relationships at that age.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you, Brother Smith, and I feel as though the same thing was true when I was in high school as well. I think just most times as a man, you're taught that, one, especially if you're a teenage male, that it's important that you be heterosexual. At least that's how it was when I was in high school. I know for the Zers that kind of cliche for a lot of them has not held weight, but especially for millennials and zennials and Xers, that was the case. And because of that, heterosexuality was kind of framed as needing to prove that you're heterosexual. And so, in proving that you're heterosexual, it's important that you not only show interest in, at that time, a girl, but that you get into some type of a relationship with a girl, whether that relationship be friendly or sexual or romantic or all of the above, it's important that whatever situation you find yourself in, you show a romantic interest in that person to keep alive this idea of masculinity that you are, or rather the perceived masculinity that you are expected to hold. And so as a teenage male, a lot of times that's what my peer group, and I would say even myself, were probably driven by at that particular point in time. So to Dr. Smith's point, like, yes, because of that, men or boys then will be looking for girls to be more than friends with, whereas girls even at that age, one are told, yes, boys are just trying to get into your pants, but two, girls are already mentally more mature. They mature faster than boys in a lot of ways, and so they've already kind of accepted and come to the realization that this idea of friendship is important, and that friendship does not have to come necessarily with these other benefits that might be attached to it. And I think that males with age oftentimes, as Dr. Smith was pointing to, figure out that there are other ways to find value in a woman now than just looking for a particular type of romantic relationship, and there's a lot of value in that friendship that can exist without that factor going into it. And that also, hopefully, as they age, this idea of what it means to be a man and what it means to be a certain sexual identity isn't going to radically affect who they're choosing to be friends with and how they're choosing to be friends with that person as well. So I think that that's also what happens as people tend to age.
Thank you for your reflections so far. And you brought up an interesting point in that as we age, how we view friendship differs. So I know within my research, I study sister circles, so support group for Black women, and both Dr. Smith and Tony and I have talked about the importance of Black men having their own circles. So I'm curious to know within sister circles and brother circles, or you can correct me of a different term, what discussions occur within these solo gender spaces that you believe both Black women and Black men should be discussing together? So that's both for everyone here at the family table.
We definitely talk about relationships sometimes. I think if it's a sister circle and once you get close enough to start talking about personal lives and dating, that does come up. And some of the things that we say, I feel like it's still also put out in public media. So social media has just become this thing where the same things that I'll say to my sister circle, other women will post on Twitter, they'll post on Facebook. So they're saying these same things, but then I think there's something about it being a public discussion where people just start getting really defensive. They start posting up, and I've seen a lot of arguments, Black men against Black women, and it becomes some kind of almost like they're, some Black men say they come away feeling like the enemy, or, but I'm wondering how those situations would become different, when it comes to dating and women wanting respect, or we want to just be able to be friends with a man, how that would be different if it wasn't in such a public sphere. But I would say the way that what we expect from relationships and things that we've gone through and how that affects how we even approach relationships, I think it would be good for men and women to do that in a room privately, where it's not a public discussion where everybody has to feel like they're putting on some face to do it.
I recall back in my 20s attending different social networking event for young Black, like the quote unquote up and coming Black professionals in Baltimore, and we would have discussions about roles. And I'm like, how antiquated is this, my brother? Do we really have to put women in a specific gender role or put brothers in a specific gender roles. And I'm like, we don't have to have this kind of fight for power or dominance. And I know that historically we have been somewhat pitted against each other with the strong Black woman syndrome, with the quote, say that us emasculating our men. And it's like, no, we don't have to buy into any of that. How we operate, how we collaborate, how we do this thing is up to us and the boundaries that we set up. But in talking to, and it was mostly Generation Zers, but in talking, it was just like, but these are old conversations that are being passed down like through osmosis or something. It's like, brother, I ain't gonna be barefoot and pregnant in the, you know, it's like, and that might be, you know,
same discussion since way back. It's been 100 years at least.
Exactly. And now I'm in my 40s and very much still negotiating this conversation with, like, especially, are you going to take your husband's last name? Are you going to do X, Y, and Z? Like, just in terms of the traditions that are put on. And if you don't, oh, you're a feminist, you're a womanist. Well, yeah, I am actually. But at the same time, being a self-loving woman doesn't make me anti-Black man. Like, I love my brothers. When I say like, for real. So just because I have a strong sense of sisterhood and a strong sense of love of self and sisterhood does not mean that that's in any way anti-Black man. And the fact that, you know, we want to have these discussions about how roles, like, that's up to each individual, you know, couple or whatever. But the power struggle that I still see that ensues within even these conversations that are between professionals, I'm like, isn't that a bit old? Do y'all have that same power struggle conversation?
Oh boy. Yes and no. Yes and no. So a couple of things. One is that I think it's really important that you all have developed this sort of network of sisterhood. I maybe we'll get more into it. I'm curious to know, like, how these circles look outside of your particular circle, you know? And the reason I bring that up is because, and one of the reasons I was really interested in doing this podcast was that I don't think of myself as being in a sort of brother circle in the same way, right? And like, I have my brothers, right? But I don't, it doesn't, for me, it doesn't quite work the same. Like, I have 3 guys who I consider like those are my guys, right? But we don't, the conversations we have, I don't know, they don't sound quite the same as this. Now, I have a good friend of mine who, we're all married at this point, but he, you know, is very traditional in terms of, you know, what he sort of, he's the man, and, you know, big chest and flex it, and, you know, but the truth of the matter is that, you know, the woman that he is married to makes most of the decisions and is sort of running, you know, is sort of the final say in what happens in most situations. But the public view of that would be that he is Fred Flintstone, right? Like, he is the man. And that comes from fragile male ego, right? Like, this idea that, you know, I'd be lying if I said that to some degree we haven't bought into that, right? This idea that you're supposed to take care of the family, protect the family, provide for the house, right? And so all of that is a construct that we have been born into and raised up to believe that is the way that you sort of show your manhood in a relationship. The reality, like, having been in a relationship for a very long time, is that is not how it works, right? It's like, it's a lot of give and take. It's a lot of relying on the other person to fill in places where you might not be as strong, to be relying on that person when you are down and not feeling like your best. Like, there's the best relationships have no sort of defined roles. You just sort of pick up where the other person needs you to pick up, and you care about that person enough that you're willing to fill in those gaps, no matter what it looks like, no matter how it happens. but those aren't the conversations that we have, right? Like those are, right? Like that might be the reality, but like the conversations that I'm having with my friends at the bar, wherever, is, man, I saw my wife and she ordered such and such from Amazon. I told her to take that back. She's not going to be running up my credit card, you know, like it's so hard to break away from that bravado, because that's how you like, you prove yourself. And this idea, you know, I heard one of you say, you know, I'm not going to be, you know, sort of barefoot and pregnant, at that sort of old adage. You know, I wish I could say that we've moved further away from that. I'm just not sure that we have. And more importantly, I'm really concerned about the messages that we're sending to young people about those types of relationships, right? Like, I'm very conscious of the fact with my son and my daughters, of having my daughters help me with things around the house, having my daughters sort of participate in, you know, whatever it is that I'm involved in. I don't want those roles to necessarily be there, because I want them to be independent people who can live with or without a partner of their choosing. But I don't know, you know, my parents didn't think of those types of things. Like those were not, that was not foremost on their mind. And without even sort of being conscious of it, they sort of codify those gender roles in my own experience. And so I'm, you know, again, as an adult, still working through some of that bravado that has been instilled in me. And I can't imagine trying to make a relationship work nowadays in the toxicity of masculinity that exists all around us. So.
And just to ask you a follow-up question with that, when we think about Black masculinity and we think about bro circles, and we were talking about mental health last week, in terms of that, because I know that I rely on my sister circles for mental health as well. And so I'm just wondering if within your you said three folks that you commune with, do you all talk about mental health in that circle? Because I would still consider that like that's your bro circle, right?
Yeah, you know, again, we don't have a cool name for it, but yeah, absolutely, that's what it is. That's exactly what it is. That's new, right? Like I would say even 5 years ago, like that was just something that it didn't happen for me and us. I think I have really noticed a change in that. I have friends, my guys, who will come to me about stuff that's going on at home, struggles they're having with raising kids, right? Like just struggles at work, dealing with the stresses of that. Like that's new, and I think it's great. I think it's really healthy, and I think that's one of the positives that I've taken away from sort of the advent of social media, is that there's been so much sort of literature that's been put out about mental health awareness that just didn't exist when I was a teenager in my early 20s. Like, you know, people wearing shirts that say, you know, Black mental health matters, you know, like stuff like that, just putting it in the public psyche has really sort of tore down a lot of those walls. And so, you know, I won't sit up here and say that we have like a bunch of heart-to-hearts about those sorts of things. But I will say that conversations that we have now are there's a little bit more depth to them, and people are a little bit more willing to sort of go behind the screen, if you will, to reveal what's happening. And I think that's really good, really positive.
I think it's interesting that you brought up the point in how you raise your children, Dr. Smith. I know for me growing up, I grew up around a lot of boys. And so also a lot of my cousins are men, a lot of my friends were men, and my mother necessarily didn't instill the gender roles like, oh, like you must play with dolls, for example, right? So I was allowed to play with the remote control cars back in the day. I had Pokemon cards, right? So I was able to have both the traditional female experience and the male experience, because it wasn't instilled in me in that way. And my mother has always raised us to be independent, because she said, like, I want to make sure that you're independent so you never need for anyone, right? So that being said, now as a young Black woman and having that mindset, and then trying to have friendships with Black men who still have that perception, like, oh, I must protect you, I must bring in the most money, is contentious, because one, we know a lot of Black women are now the breadwinners, right? And historically, Black men and Black women, we've always have to work. So I think that's another conversation that we miss when we think about these gender roles. Like, we didn't really have the opportunity to quote unquote be homemakers, because we had to work in some regard. So I think that's a conversation that we also need to have, is that, okay, how were you raised? Because it definitely affects the way you look at manhood and womanhood. And also, what are your perceptions on what needs to be brought to the table within these gendered relationships? Because as you said, you're not having these conversations with your Black men, which is new to me, because I was like, oh, well, at the barbershop, maybe they be chopping it up, having these hearts of hearts, you know what I mean? But I don't sit in these barbershops, right? So it's interesting that you say, like, oh, for the majority, we're talking about how do we maintain this, like, Black masculine mask, right? Because you're putting on this mask that I have to maintain this role that's people perceive me to have. So it's interesting that you say that even though mental health is coming to the surface more, that we're not having these conversations as much. So I'm curious to know, when we think about also the sexism that exists within America, Dr. 99 brought up the point, and that a lot of Black men feel as though they're the quote unquote enemy when we do have these public discussions about gender roles and gendered experiences. We can also think of the term misogynoir. Misogynoir was coined by Dr. Moya Bailey and Trudy in 2008 to describe the anti-Black racist misogyny that Black women experience. So I'm wondering, how do you both, Tony and Sedrick, as Black men, respond to misogyny noir within your Black male spaces or within your Black women to Black men friendships?
I think for me, I try not to tolerate it, and I try to respond to it by countering that in some way. But I'll be honest, though, I've encountered some friction in my own life from people that I've done that with Black men that I've done that with. And that's not to villainize Black men at all. It's just been a couple times in my particular experience that when you step out on a limb, which is not really a limb to a lot of us, but when you step out on that limb to call out misogyny and sexism, that people sometimes feel as though you are diminishing their voice in some way, and that you are diminishing their opinion in some way. And that creates sometimes a disconnect between you and particular men that might feel that way, to the point where you might be cordial with the person or even cool with the person, but the deep connection that you're seeking with that individual is just not going to take place in the same way. I would also say, to Dr. Smith's earlier point about, having your chest out as a Black man, I really feel as though Black men are more apt to be to want to be perceived as masculine than any other race of men out there. And that has to do with history, in my opinion, of slavery. You have to look at what happened to the Black family and the Black woman and the Black man during slavery. Black man's family was separated from him and taken away from him. The Black man's wife, mate, significant other, was sometimes raped in front of him. And then you see Jim Crow. Then you see rights taken away from men, specifically in Black men, because women did not have rights in the United States basically at all during those times. And then you see segregation, and then you see mass incarceration. And so you're seeing this emasculation of the Black man over and over and over again. by this particular nation. And so, of course, if I'm feeling as a people emasculated, I'm going to double down on the masculinity that society does feel that I possess. And that's how I walk. That's my physicality. That's the deepness of my voice. That's the darkness of my skin. You know, that's the coolness that I possess. These things are tied into masculinity. That's the ability to quote go out with whatever woman that I want to go out with, because that's how it's perceived. So when it comes to these friendships that you then get into, that overcorrecting becomes misogyny sometimes as well. And so it's important to call that out, but while calling that out, to kind of give that backstory and history there as well. But I honestly try to surround myself with friends who I don't want to say think like me because that's kind of a dangerous thought to have as well. But I will say I try to surround myself with friends who have done the work themselves to not have that misogynistic kind of outlook. But to Dr. Smith's point, there are times where you're still going to get men who, in wanting to puff their chest out, may feed into some, misogynistic notions around who runs the house or who runs the relationship, et cetera, et cetera. And it's it's kind of this tightrope that you're having to walk sometimes, because you kind of have to call things out, but you have to be able to sometimes pick your battles as well and say, okay, well, I won't address that one because I'm trying to get through to them in this way. So I'm gonna let that one slide, and then the next one that they say that may be a little bit deeper, I'll go in on that one. So it's really trying to be diplomatic about the situation and realize again where that misogyny, not in all Black men at all, but in certain populations of Black men is coming from in the first place.
Yeah, I think a couple of things to piggyback off what Tony just said. One is I echo the idea of picking your battles, right? And so Dr. Cupid brought up was something I hadn't even thought about in terms of relationships with Black men, which is the barbershop, right? So I go to a barber. He's probably, I think he just turned 30, so he's a few years younger than me. And I'm like, I take my sons there. It's Black owned. Go every other Saturday. Black guys just chopping it up, mostly about sports, and most of the guys are younger, right? Like and the barbershop is the barbershop. The barbershop is, guys, Saturday letting loose. There's no women, just kind of talking, having a good time. And every once in a while, guys will bring up, oh, my girl, so and so, my girl, she don't do that. She know I don't play that. My girl, I never let my girl do that. It's bravado. And what I found is that as I've been there for longer, is that I feel more comfortable finding the moments to redirect. Right. And again, like to speak to Tony's point is that, in a situation like that, it's very rare, unless someone's saying something that is completely, off the wall. I'm not going to be like, excuse me, gentlemen, what you're saying right now has crossed the line and the boundaries, and I will not, like, that's just not what happens, right? Instead, what I'll say is, man, you don't say nothing like that. Man, you don't talk to your girl like that. Yeah, I don't really talk to her like that. We just be playing, like, and it de-escalates, right? He has this sort of bravado. He's trying to like have his moment, and then the rest of us are looking at him like, that's not really what happens. And he's like, all right, yeah, that's not really what happens, right? And so it makes him less likely to tell one of these sort of fictionalized John Henry sort of stories about his manhood later on, right? Because he knows, like, we're going to call him on it and say, that's not really what's happening here. Now, if it's one of my guys, like one of my really close friends, and I hear them saying something, and that does happen from time to time, right? Because we have different experiences and different job types and things like that. That's a direct conversation, right? Because that guy, I know we can have it out, and we're just going to have it out, like, and it's not the end of our friendship because we're that close, right? And so it's that authentic that I can say like no. And so I often don't hear it as much in comments about women as I do hear it about homophobic comments, right? This idea that Black men especially, and again, this sort of, piggybacking off what Tony said, the roots of this stem from slavery, but I would argue that there's a tangent of it that has sort of come from sort of the modern Black church, and the influence that it's had in the Black community in terms of, unfortunately, there's lots of positives that come from the Black church as well. But this fear of homosexuality, and that Black men are so afraid of being labeled as gay, right? And so, I mean, we've all heard, I hear it a lot because I teach kids, two guys will be wrestling and you hear one of them say, "No homo," right? I have to, in the middle of this moment that we're having, right, I have to make it very clear to you that I am not a homosexual, right? No matter, I said something funny, you laugh too hard, no homo, right? Just so we're clear, I need to make it very clear to you that I am a heterosexual male in this moment. And again, that gets back to that idea that we've been taught to sort of prove ourselves, right? To prove our masculinity. And we see it in pop culture all the time. There was the controversy, I don't know how attuned you all are to pop culture, but, Dwayne Wade's son, Dwayne Wade's daughter transitioned, his daughter Zaya transitioned, and there were all sorts of hip hop artists who, said all sorts of nasty things about Dwayne Wade. And I saw a post the other day, he died, Dwayne Wade, the basketball player, dyed his hair red. And I mean, you should have read the comments on Twitter and on Instagram under his picture. "Oh, I knew he was gay the whole time. This was him letting his son turn gay. That was the cover for him to turn gay," right? This fear mongering around homosexuality in the Black community, to me, at least in my opinion, is tied to the issues of misogyny, right? This idea that in order to be a Black man, you have to, 1, be in charge, 2, be dominant, 3, be heterosexual, right? If you aren't those things, you are not a Black man, right? And so it impacts the way that Black men treat women, and it also impacts the way that Black men treat other Black people in general, regardless of their gender construct.
I found that to be really interesting. I was talking to someone the other day about just the cultural differences within Blackness. So, for example, I find that African and or Caribbean men are able to be more affectionate to their Black men friendship without their masculinity being challenged. Whereas in the US, it's like you said, like, "Oh, no homo, dude." Like, "No, we can't be hugging," or you have to hug in a quote unquote masculine way, the dabs, the handshake coming, making all the noise. So I'm just wondering about the American context, right? What is so peculiar about America that Black men feel as though they always have to prove their Black maleness, that they can't be as affectionate with their Black men, or even within their affection, they still have to perform that bravado. So I'm wondering, have you ever reflected upon that experience? I don't know if you feel as though that way when you show affection towards your Black men friends, if you still have to somehow perform that bravado to a certain degree. So I'm curious to know if you've ever reflected upon that within yourself.
I mean, for me, I definitely feel that you do have to still perform that bravado sometimes when showing affection, so you might have affection and then you make a little joke afterward just to let the other male know that you're not too caring or something like that. But which is crazy, obviously. I would say that I do feel though that a lot of this is cultural as it relates to the United States specifically. I do not, I mean, I do feel that it may be more so a thing for Black men to withhold some of that affection when trying to show affection for their brothers. But I do feel as though in some ways it's something that white men and white American men and Asian American men do to a lesser extent as well. And I use that example because, for instance, I know of African African friends of mine who are more affectionate towards one another in their own brotherhoods, for instance, but are more homophobic than some Black American men that I know. And so this idea, as Sedrick was saying, of around homophobia is still present in other Black non-American cultures. The misogyny is still present within those cultures as well, but the friendships and the dynamics still allow for the showing of affection to be present um, in a more obvious and present fashion than we see in Black American men as well. So I think that I think that we are kind of thinking in terms of whether or not our friendships are different or the same as Black men from other cultures, when in fact, in some ways they're different, but in the underlying factors, the misogyny sometimes that goes into them, the homophobia that goes into it, the bravado, as Sedrick was saying, around other things that goes into it, definitely all play into those other um, Black male dynamics in other places sometimes as well. And so I really do feel that this is I wouldn't say necessarily a worldwide thing, but I would say that it transcends nationality at the same time as well, um, even though we see more affection shown in for Black men of other cultures sometimes.
Yeah, I agree with what Tony said there. For me, it's interesting. Dr. Cupid, I have reflected on it some, and like Tony was saying, I do perform the bravado with my brothers. I do. We have handshakes. We don't hug. We have special handshakes that we do. Like it allows us to, you know, greet each other while keeping our distance, right? And it's interesting to think about, for me, to think about sort of the relationships that Black fathers have with their Black sons, right? For me, I was very lucky in that I had a father who was very affectionate, right? And that he told me he loved me all the time. And I know that that's not true for many Black men, right? That there's this idea that you don't, there are Black men who go years, sometimes lifetimes, without hearing their Black fathers tell them that they love them. And I was lucky to live in a house where my father said it all the time. And so I'm very conscious of the fact that I tell my son all the time that I love him, right? I want him to know that. And in many ways, it sort of tore down walls for me to know that Black men could be affectionate in that way with each other. But I think it's hard for Black men to be affectionate with other Black men when they don't have that at home, when they don't first see that at home. And so we walk out into the world sort of guarded and protectionist because we're not sure where to get the love from, and we haven't received that kind of love from Black men before. And so it's hard. Like, it really is hard to deal with.
Thank you both for sharing your reflections. We're going to transition to our last question for the Exhale segment. And this question states, can you reflect upon your educational experience and how Black friendship has shown up for you? So that question is for everyone. So think about the ways in which Black men and women have shown up for you regards to your educational experience.
I mean, for me, I would say that Black men have been there for me from a friendship place to just be supportive of what I'm doing in my education sphere. right now in this PhD program, I have Black males who are friends of mine who are, have completed their educations but are still rooting me on. And so even while they're not with me in my program, I definitely feel support in that way. When I was in high school, I definitely think just having a routine was very helpful to me. Having a routine after school with one Black male friend in particular of mine. After school, we used to, play soccer or listen to music or get something to eat and then do homework afterwards. Sometimes we would do homework together. Sometimes we would go to our separate houses and do homework. But we definitely both knew how important it was to work hard in school, and we definitely pushed each other. And I remember him bringing up all the time to Dr. Smith's point that in his case, his mother always showed him love and affection, but also told him that as a Black man that he would have to work twice as hard. And so that's something that he repeated a lot when we were interacting with one another. And I definitely feel like that helped drive me as well. And then when I got into college, I wouldn't say I had as many Black male friends who maybe were Black American friends. I had Black male friends, some of whom were African, some of whom were Black American. But we studied together, we laughed together, and that was also very helpful. And for me, I should have mentioned this earlier on in the podcast, but I did not have a father growing up. My father um, ran out on myself and my sister. So, I was actually adopted and I was raised in a white household. And so, that brings a whole different set of what it means to be a Black man for me in my experience. And so it was helpful for me to interact specifically with other Black men when I hit puberty and also when I was in college to show me that being a Black man was not an experience that was a monolith in any way, and I got to see so many different types of individuals, and it really helped me shape my own path, and that affected not only my education but also the specific field that I decided to go into for my education as well. So I definitely feel that, as Sedrick was saying earlier, while I don't define what I have necessarily as a brother circle because I have a lot of these singular relationships, they were definitely very helpful.
Yeah, I said in the intro that I'm a Baltimore boy, and so I went to Baltimore City Public Schools, and it's a city that's 65% Black, but the schools are 85% Black, right? And so my K-12 experience was surrounded by other smart Black kids, right? And I knew that they were capable, and I knew I went to, my elementary school has been shut down. Actually, my middle school got shut down too. But when I was at those schools, I was, fortunate enough to be in gifted and talented programs, and I was surrounded by smart Black kids. And to Tony's point, like they really pushed me. Like I was smart, and some of them were smarter, and I needed to keep up. And I think that was, looking back on it, I think that was so vital, to have a space. Um, and I wish all of our Black kids could be in situations where they are surrounded by Black kids, Black teachers who are pouring into them, right? Who are pushing them to be their best. And I was very fortunate in that sense that I was surrounded by so many, and that continued into high school, where I, met at that point, going to a citywide school, having kids literally from all across Baltimore at that point. Most of whom were Black, and we're going to Princeton, and we're going to Johns Hopkins, and we're going to Spelman and Morehouse, and we're going to these really great colleges. And so the expectation was that I was going to go to college, right? Because all the other Black kids were going to college, I was going to go to college, right? And then, you know, I stepped into this PhD program, just sort of life sort of took me that way. That was never my intention. And then I meet a mentor who is a Black woman who really pours into me. And then there are all these, you know, UMBC, I think, does a really great job of really sort of selecting their cohorts of candidates in the PhD programs. And so it was uplifting to be in a classroom of mostly Black people having deep philosophical discussions, you know, like that was empowering, that was uplifting, that lit a fire in me. And I wanted to prove myself and to feel like I was capable. And so my educational experience, I've been fortunate that I've been littered with Black men and women who have been surrounding me and pouring into me and wanting to see me be successful educationally. And so my goal is to give that back. Like I feel like I have an obligation with my students, both, you know, that I teach collegiately, but also that I teach at the high school level, to pour into them, to be more than just a teacher, right? I think as a Black educator, you have to, you know, be part parent, part coach, part cheerleader, you know, like all those things, to let them know that whatever they want to do is possible. And specifically, you know, my brothers, you know, they have been supportive of me throughout. You know, all of us went to college. I'm the only one who went to masters and beyond, but they were always cheerleaders and supporters and big up in me as I moved on to the next level and the next level. And to me, that's how they show love, you know, like, you know, they don't have to say necessarily, I love you, to say, you know, like, you know, they're pouring love into me by celebrating with me and checking in on me and encouraging me. And sometimes you know, sometimes it's more important than hearing someone say, I love you.
Yeah, I definitely agree, Dr. Smith, with that for sure. And I just wanted to add as well that while I've been in the PhD program and also when I was a master's student, Black women have been extremely, extremely helpful to me in my education career. I wouldn't be where I am without Black women specifically. And I also had the same mentor, I think, that Dr. Smith is probably mentioning, that was a mentor to me in undergrad who was instrumental not only in my success at the PhD level, but also greatly influenced the field that I'm in now, which is the field of studying interracial adoption. And, you know, a lot of these relationships and how they help us as Black men, whether they be friendships with Black women or Black men, is they help us realize our identities and affirm ourselves in a more holistic manner than we were able to prior to having these particular relationships. And like Dr. Smith is saying, whether or not that person is saying I love you or showing that type of affection that maybe some of us are looking for sometimes, they are saying I love you in a different love language that is communicating to us how much they care about us, and communicates to us a lot of times how much we also need to care not only about ourselves but about the crafts that we're going into, and how important it is as Black men to show not only strength to other people but empathy to those that are coming after us, so we can have, you know, great educators like Dr. Smith at City who are pouring into these Generation Zers right now, who are young men who then may be deflecting, right, in their own types of barbershop type environments when they hear misogynistic comments, who may be defending Dwayne Wade and Zaya, you know, later on in life or right now as well, as in part because of the influence of somebody like a Dr. Smith or like the mentors that we've had as well. So I think that all of that really goes into positively affecting how we look to seek to change the world as well.
Dr. 99, Dr. Lyrical Tay, did y'all have anything y'all wanted to end on before we transition to the affirmation segment?
No, I'm good.
I did want to add that as far as an educational journey, a lot of the support that I had came from a group that was mostly male, and that I just happened to be, you know, when I first applied to grad school, I didn't get in. So I had a year of unemployment before starting grad school, and the guys I hung out with were neighborhood guys. They were unemployed. They get together at a house and some put in on a bottle of vodka, and everybody would, you know, join. It's the stuff that we hear about that stereotypes Black men who are unemployed and stuff. But when we talk about, we didn't call it a, you know, a circle, but we actually called it crew. But it was, you know, men who over years lived in the same neighborhood. A lot of them still lived in the same neighborhood, or even the ones that had moved out or got married would come back, you know, on Friday nights, because they know this is a crew that gets together over drinks, and somebody would set up a laptop and play some hip hop or whatever. So just thinking about things like that that don't sound so scholarly and perfect, but that really helped me as far as mental health goes, get through that rough time. And those were still the people who, you know, when it's Memorial Day and I come back for the cookout, still are, you know, shouting me out and cheering me on. And it didn't have anything to do with them also being in school or, you know, but I just wanted to shout out that that it happens in so many other different ways. And those ways are stereotyped, and those are the things that we study as far as a problem, but they can be really helpful in terms of mental health for groups of friends. All right, now it's time for affirmations. Do we have our affirmations ready? We could start with our guests. So Tony?
We have to talk about liberating minds as well as liberating society. And that quote is from Angela Davis.
All right, Dr. Smith?
I believe in the brotherhood of man, all men, but I don't believe in brotherhood with anybody who doesn't want brotherhood with me. I believe in treating people right, but I'm not going to waste my time trying to treat somebody right who doesn't know how to return the treatment. And that's from Brother Malcolm X, December 12th, 1964, New York City.
All right, Lyrical Tay, Dr. Lyrical Tay.
This is just a rumination of reflection from the conversation today and what's going on currently and what's been going on with our brothers and sisters in terms of white supremacy. Brothers and sisters, we are in this journey together. We need to reflect together, grow together, push each other as a community, because we all we got and we who we've been waiting for.
Dr. Cupid?
Thank you again, Brother Scholars, for joining us at the family table. My affirmation is I'm rooting for everybody Black by Issa Rae. And I selected that affirmation when just listening to our discussions tonight in regards to both Sedrick and Tony saying, like, the way we show love shows that we're celebrating our Blackness and we're affirming our Blackness, whether or not we're Black women or Black men. So I really want us to think about the mindset that we can all win, but in order to win, we have to win together. So again, I'm rooting for everybody Black by Issa Rae.
All right. And my quote is from Alice Walker. No person is your friend who demands your silence or denies your right to grow.
Word.
Thank you so much, brothers, for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for having us.
Thank you so much for exhaling with us. Please join the conversation on social media and share with your friends. Use the hashtag Sista Docs Exhale and follow us at Sista Docs Exhale on Twitter. And you can also reach us on Facebook and make comments under the YouTube video. So until next time, we wish you love, light, and insight. Say peace, everybody.
Peace.
Peace.
Peace, everyone.